Does your church have a dashboard indicating your progress towards your vision? We're talking about that today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, our
Scott.
introduction to the topic today is an excuse to talk about one of my favorite things.
You're the metrics guy, man. You got it.
Oh, I wasn't going to say that.
Oh, I was giving you credit for tracking progress.
Oh, no, I was going to say air travel.
That is a favorite topic that we spend too much time on. Yes.
Yeah. Is there I feel like I should know this. Is there a word for, like, if you're a person who loves books, you're a bibliophile?
Oh.
If you are a person who loves aviation, is there a word for that?
Yeah. You're not necessarily an aviation enthusiast. You could apply enthusiast to anything. I think we're travel enthusiasts, and
I don't know. I mean,
even like
I
the
love a good
process of arranging travel.
yeah.
That's very
I don't know,
niche-y.
but I think that has bled over to me cultivating like a general interest in how do airplanes work and what are yeah. I enjoy
God
these
holds
things.
them up with his mighty right hand.
He's got the whole plane in his hands. Is that what you're
He's
saying?
got the whole plane.
Indeed, he does. But so what's the relationship between our podcast topic today and aviation? It's a little analogy I like to use. When you are flying on an airplane, which you and I will both be on the same flight here, a week from tomorrow,
Yeah.
at the recording of this podcast.
Mhm.
And we'll be flying at what, 500 plus miles an hour at, I would say,
Airspeed. Yeah.
airspeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Hopefully ground speed will well exceed that number.
We'll be flying with the airstream, the jet stream. So
That's
I
right.
would say, yeah. At what, 30,000 feet, 35,000 feet, probably something like
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
And you can't feel it. You and I will both be able to stand up.
Mhm.
We're not going to be congregating in the galley. They ask you not to do that, but one could. One could walk to the restroom. One could walk to the galley. One could get
Yeah.
up and walk around, and you would never, I mean, other than the fact that you're in a metal can, you have no sense that you are going that fast, right?
Yeah. It would be bad if it didn't work that way, and if you happen to jump, you would just slam into the back of the plane at 500 miles an hour.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
I'm
Yeah,
glad physics works the way it does. Yeah.
right. Now the exception is when you're taking off, you could feel that
Mhm.
just increase in speed, and when
Mhm.
you're landing, certainly you can feel the deceleration as
Yeah.
you touch down. And I think the same is true for churches. When you are just cruising as a church, you don't have a sense of how fast or slow you're going. And maybe this is actually a good point, AJ. When you are flying from west to east, this is now we're getting really in the weeds, but when you're flying west to east, you
Mhm.
are flying with the jet stream, and
Mhm.
your relative ground speed could be what, 700 miles an
Some
hour?
planes were
Some
hitting 800 last week. Yeah.
just crazy. I mean, you do feel that because it's a little intense. But um, you might be going 600, 700 miles an hour when you're flying with the jet stream, but it doesn't feel any different when you are flying from east to west and you are flying against the jet stream.
Mhm.
Other than the fact that the flight takes longer, you don't have a sense, an intuitive sense. Your body is not intuiting, oh, this feels different than when you're going the other
Right.
direction,
Yeah.
right? So you don't have a sense of how fast or slow you're going. It just feels like you're going. And churches don't have, unless you are rapidly growing or you are rapidly declining, you don't have a sense for how fast or slow your church is going towards its vision. We're just going.
Hmm.
And you may be really far, or you may be really close. You may be speeding up. You may be slowing down. But do you know who knows the
Jesus.
speed? Yes, the Lord. You know who else knows
Oh,
how fast or slow the plane is going?
the people that are paying attention to the metrics.
The pilots, right?
Yeah. Oh, I thought
They
we switched to church. I didn't know we were
No,
still.
I'm saying
Oh,
no, in the
oh, we're still
plane.
in the airplane. Sure. Yes, the pilots. Yeah,
Pilot.
the
And
pastor pilot
how do the pilots know, AJ?
from the instrumentation, Scott.
Yes, they have a dashboard that has instrumentation that tells them this. Now, if you're flying in a big wide body airplane, you might have you know, a screen that would give you access to some of this information as well. But on a lot of airplanes, those don't exist. And so you don't have any sense.
Old school.
You have no way to know.
Steam gauges versus glass cockpit. But yes, if yeah, like the Red Baron, like open cockpit, stick and rudder. Yeah, you know almost nothing. Not a lot of Red Baron
That's true. It has been a
barnstorming
long
bi-wing
time since
planes.
1914. Yeah.
The Wright brothers knew nothing.
The Wright brothers had no idea. Uh, okay. Whew. Speaking of planes, let's land this one. Let's land this analogy. Uh, the pilots have a dashboard. They know how fast or slow the plane is going. You as a leader, if you could be just as clueless as the people in the pews if you don't have a dashboard. And people get very nervous when you start talking about, hey, let's build a dashboard. People go, this isn't a business. I know it. I understand that. It's not about wrapping up our identity in the numbers or anything like that. It isn't about setting goals so that we can become a, performance driven culture. Like that's not the point. The point is to have an awareness because it's not intuitive. You need to craft some tools that give you an awareness as
Yeah,
to whether or not we're actually moving forward in the vision that God is calling us to.
yeah.
And are we making progress? So that's the topic of today's podcast. The art of setting what we call internally, we call them vision indicators. These are indicators that you are making progress towards your vision. And so we're going to break this down into three kind of subpoints. The first one will be around kind of just defining what a vision indicator is, what makes a vision indicator a vision indicator. The second point will be around developing effective vision indicators. So where, how could we make a good one versus one that's not very good? And then how do we implement them? So that's where we're headed today. And hand it over to you, my friend.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Understanding vision indicators. So first of all, we connect vision indicators to steps in our discipleship pathway. And so now some of you are like, what are we talking about now?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a prerequisite here that we would at least recommend. I wouldn't say it would be possible to implement vision indicators without having a clear understanding of your discipleship pathway, but you're not going to be able to hone in on your effectiveness, I think, as clearly and be able to identify where change should happen. So
Yeah.
for
Let me pause you for a second. So
okay.
let's give the 30-second logic breakdown because this is kind of a tie into this is what we do in strategic envisioning, like when we work with a church. But here's the logical progression. What is the mission of the church? To make and mature disciples. What does a disciple look like? That's defined by our values. How do we actually build disciples that look like that? That's a discipleship pathway. What would it look like if we actually were effective at making disciples? That's our vision. And as a part of that, we would say, okay, let's create a set of indicators that shows us that we're making progress in alignment with our discipleship pathway. And then the fifth question we would say is, all right, well then what are we going to do this year to help us improve and accomplish these goals? So that's the literally 30-second overview of kind of what we cover in strategic envisioning. But there's a logical progression to that. We're not just kind of pulling out of thin air. Well, you need to have a vision indicator for each step in your discipleship pathway. Those are all rooted in a sequence of sort of steps
Yeah.
logically.
Yeah. Yeah. So having 3 to 5 steps that your church has as a framework for discipling people to maturity, from their introduction into the church to, committed members who are serving and fellowshipping and doing all the good things that mature believers should be engaged in. 3 to 5 steps is all a church needs to be able to accomplish that work. And we would want to see a vision indicator, at least one vision indicator in each of those steps. So the benefit of connecting your vision indicators into the pathway steps is that it drives you to focus then on the actions of that step. So what we're truly measuring is the performance of the output that we want to see happen in that particular step of the pathway. When we focus on the pathway, and desired outcomes, and we measure those desired outcomes, then we can make the necessary changes, as is necessary, from time to time, to improve the function of that step and the output, the success, if you will, in that step. All then taken collectively, is leading towards the accomplishment of our vision, through the Great Commission. So that's
Yeah.
another way of breaking it down.
So I recognize like totally it can be difficult to discern and understand the difference between input and output measures. Like that's
Mhm.
can sound like word salad. So let me give a couple of other ways of thinking about it that are all saying the same thing.
Okay.
So um, there's a kind of a well-known book in the leadership space that's not church related, but the 4 disciplines of execution. And in that book, they talk about lead versus lag measures. So a lag measure is something that you can only measure after the action has happened, right? Like how much revenue did a company bring in, or how much money came in from contributions in a church. You can't it's not something that drives action necessarily. It's something that just measures what already happened. And attendance is like this. It's a lag measure. How many people came this week? Um, versus a lead measure, which is a measure which is designed to drive strategic action and behavior. So how many guest connect cards did were collected this week? Or, that even is still a little laggy. What percentage of Connect Card people took their next best step? So these are all things they are measures that are designed to drive action rather than measures that simply quantify what has already happened. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes. And sometimes a measure would be a lead and a lag. It would be both, but there's some, like attendance is only a lag measure. There's no follow up or follow through after that. Like, great, you were here, you left, nothing else is going to happen. But yeah, when a guest fills out a connect card, yes, it's measuring something that just happened in the past. This is how many people did it. But that's the initiation of a sequence of events, hopefully in your church, that we will then be continuing something. It
Right.
goes beyond that. Yeah.
Correct. So it's a lead measure in 2 ways. One, in order for me to collect connect cards, I need to have communicated that there is a connect card.
Right.
I needed to have some system for collecting them. I need to be optimizing that connect card that encourages more people to actually fill it out. I need to probably broaden my definition of a connect card to include things like children's check-ins from newcomers. That's not a connect card per se, but I
Mhm.
got the same information and probably more than what I would get in a Connect card, but it functions like a Connect card even though it isn't one. I could
Mhm.
have digital and paper versions of these things. So all of these things, the fact that I'm measuring the Connect card is driving maybe the means by which I'm accumulating them. And then to your point, it's also driving the behavior or action that's happening once I've received it. What am I
Yeah.
doing with that? How am I following up with that guess, etc. So hopefully that makes sense that it's now Whereas attendance is just a totally passive thing for us to measure.
Hmm.
It's happened.
Yeah.
There's not a
We don't know
lot.
who was here. We don't know who wasn't here.
Right. It just
Yeah.
we have a total aggregate number. Not that that's not it has no value. It's just not predictive necessarily of where we're going. It's not driving strategic action towards our vision. So a
Exactly.
good vision indicator is telling us. Um, maybe a good example of this, AJ. Oh, now I really run the risk of revealing my ignorance
Mm.
about aviation. But my understanding is that you at certain altitudes you need to maintain a particular speed in order to prevent a stall. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct.
Okay. And so you've got like sort of
Helicopters can
optimal,
hover. Planes cannot hover.
right?
Yeah.
So you've got an optimal zone, and if you don't want to have it, you don't want to be going too fast, and you don't want to be going too slow, because you can have different kinds of problems depending
Yeah.
on if you're doing that, right? And so I guess it's a little bit like that. It's like having a good vision indicator tells us, all right, I need to apply more thrust here, or I need to change my flap settings, or I need to, it's knowing what that optimal zone is going to drive behavior on the part of the pilot. Am I really stretching the metaphor here? Um, and I think that that's a similar thing we're trying to do here. It's not like, you know, the altitude is what it is or whatever, but I need when I have a good indicator here, and I think that in a modern airplane, it's going to give them a zone and it's going to be dynamic. It's going to shift depending on where they're at in the flight plan. So the pilot knows how they need to aviate in order to make sure that they're flying safely. And
Yeah.
likewise, a good vision indicator is going to give you some sort of a range. It's going to drive you to behave in a particular way.
Yeah. Somebody listening is an aviator, and so I have to correct. Planes can hover if your airspeed, if the air coming at you is at or above your stall speed, you can hover an airplane. So that it is possible. I misspoke. Yeah.
I, I don't think that that's ideal. It's probably not a good thing if you're hovering.
It's fun. It's interesting. I mean, there's videos out there of, small, like a Cessna 152, with a 50 knot headwind, and their ground speed goes to zero. I mean, the plane is not capable of flying beyond the headwind, but the headwind is strong enough for it to fly. So provides enough lift. Yeah, so you can hover. You can hover an airplane if you have a strong enough headwind.
Not ideal,
You're
you'd
not
say.
getting anywhere. It doesn't hurt anything. You're going nowhere at that point.
You're going nowhere. I think that's maybe that's a great metaphor for a
Maybe
lot
it
of
is.
churches,
Yeah.
is we're flying, baby, we're flying, and
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
they're not going anywhere.
Actually, maybe that enhances the metaphor. It is
Yeah,
possible. Yeah, that
it's
yeah.
possible to feel like you're flying and to be
Hmm.
going
And but
nowhere.
you're not going anywhere. And in fact, even if the wind gets a little stronger, you could go backwards. You could decline in your forward progress.
Oh, that's good. That's good. All right, let's move on to our next thing here: developing effective vision indicators.
All right, developing your indicators. So, your indicators, as we mentioned, should align with your pathway. Indicators, I mean, they should be easily measurable. You don't need to create a difficult system by which to be able to monitor these things. And so, don't overcomplicate it. It should be easily measurable. It should be something that's easily reportable, and that is something that well, I don't know what I'm trying to say at that point, Scott. Don't overcomplicate it. It should be something that decision makers are able to see. But on the other hand, you don't need to react to these things in real time. We are talking about a church, not an airplane. So yeah, if our airspeed gets to a stall point, you immediately need to nose down and gain some airspeed. We're not going to do that every week in the church. We're like, this is a little off. we're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction and change something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that most churches are are more like even small churches. They tend to be more like big planes, not like Cessnas. You know, where small corrections can have a big impact.
Yeah,
You know, it's like driving on the highway versus driving in the city. You know, if you see something, you don't want to do a,
yeah,
for those of you who are not watching, I just turned the wheel in a very jerky way. You don't want to do that when you're driving on the highway because that's very dangerous. And so, yeah, to your point, you want to be tracking these things, you want to be measuring these things, you want to be seeing your progress, but you don't want to overreact to fluctuations because you may actually do more damage than anything positive. So there are three golden rules, AJ,
yeah.
for putting a defining or selecting a vision indicator. Number one, they got to be something you can actually track. So this will be a mistake when I'm working with churches and we're trying to select vision indicators. They'll often come up with something. They'll be like, "What about this?" And it sounds good in theory, but I'm like, "How would you actually know that you did that?
Hmm.
Is that something that you can actually track?" And they'll say, no, we can't. Then it's not a good vision indicator. You have to actually be able to track it. Secondly, they need to be output oriented, as we've talked about, or they need to be lead measures, not lag measures. They got to be things that drive behavior
Mm-hmm.
and drive strategic action. And third, they need to be in alignment with your church's overarching vision, which assumes that you have one. I mean,
Mm.
if you don't have a vision for the future, it's going to be difficult to develop a set of vision indicators. But these they don't need to stay the same. All like you don't need to measure the same things every year. I would encourage you to keep it for a year, track it for a year, but after a year, you could choose to measure something different in relation to your discipleship pathway. But anything you choose to measure should align with your discipleship pathway, but should also point you towards your overall vision and where you're trying to go.
Yeah. We
And
don't mean
so,
change just for fun. Like, it was interesting to measure that. How about this? And it should have some strategy to it. Like we're trying to hone in on maybe a better or more accurate piece of information, something more beneficial.
right. So here's an example. Um, as we kind of dive into, maybe we could explore a couple of example vision indicators. Um, Within a step in your discipleship pathway that's focused on community life, you could choose to measure the percentage of average worship attendance who is engaged in attending a group or class. That's kind of a generic standard starting point. That kind of vision indicator is going to spur on the strategic action of moving people from the big room to the small room. So we want to, as quickly as possible, kind of get people out of the auditorium and into small groups and into classrooms. That's the kind of behavior that it's going to drive. A different thing you could choose to measure is the number of overall groups you have.
Mm-hmm.
So a church I was just with this past weekend said we want to go from, I think it's 12 community groups to, I think they said 18 community groups in over the course of the next year. So basically add six.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is a good one, but it certainly will increase the overall number of people engaged in a group or class. That's kind of a net benefit, but the kind of action it's driving is different. It's driving the development of new groups, a way to communicate new groups, the recruitment of new group leaders, the training of new group leaders, and
Yeah.
finding the location of where new groups are going to meet, etc. So
Yeah.
it's driving. Hopefully, you can see how that would drive a different kind of strategic behavior. One is more about trying to just assimilate people into groups, and one is focused on the actual formation and
Yeah.
recruitment of new group leaders. They
Yeah.
have the
I think you
same
can.
general outcome, which is more people in groups,
Yeah. Right.
but the measure itself drives different behavior. Does that make sense, AJ?
Yeah. You're doing a little bit of Trump hands there. Just had to point that out. It was looking a
It's
little. The groups. We
it,
got the best
it's a
groups.
it's pretty good measure. The best measure.
Yeah, you can see we're carrying that out, to another year, how you would want to do that. You mentioned training leaders. So like, hey, our church has gotten great at communicating the benefit of being connected in a group, and people are continuing to do that at increasing numbers every year. We're measuring how many groups can we launch, how many have we launched, but now we're launching so many groups and our church is growing. We need a pipeline for training group leaders. So now we're really focusing on how effective is our leader training going? How many leaders are we going to train this year to be in the pipeline to launch more groups? So I think that's kind of a good example of how your measures would change based on the success that you're finding in these initiatives that are leading towards our vision
Right.
accomplishment.
And with the needs of the kind of just adapting the measure to impact just, yeah, I guess is what you're saying. Sort of the life cycle of where you're at in
Right. Yeah.
where is the gap?
Hmm.
Is the gap in the assimilation part? Is the gap in the group creation part? Is the gap in the group leader recruitment part? And depending
Yeah.
on where that gap is, we're going to choose a different measure. So yes, we're not kind of like we're not choosing a different measure for no reason. We're going to pick a measure in alignment with that step
Yeah.
that's going to drive strategic action in the
Mhm.
area where we need the most.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you'd call it psychology, but when we're measuring something, it gets our attention. When it has our attention, then we put effort and time into it, to make it work. So, that's one of the reasons that we should be measuring things and a variety of things, because it maintains our attention, which then allows us the resources and that we need to hopefully make progress through those things. You don't necessarily, let's make clear on this too. You don't have to stop measuring something. It's okay to keep measuring something and adding a measure. You want to end up with like 100 things we're measuring. Um,
No.
but you don't always have to just totally stop measuring something in order to measure something else.
Right. Yeah. When we talk about, I'm like loath to even mention this because there's a whole subset of people who will cringe when I say it, but I don't care. Um, in in a in a traditional corporate setting, a business might define what they call KPIs or key performance indicators,
Yeah.
and they're specifically designed to kind of show progress in a particular aspect of the company, right?
Hmm.
This is not entirely the same because we're talking about church and churches aren't businesses, but the role that they play is something similar. It is one specific indicator. We're not going to have 12 in one area. It's one specific indicator that is showing us or telling us something about a one specific area within the church. So
Yeah.
when you have too many, you actually don't have good information anymore because it starts to muddy the picture.
Yeah. 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 I don't know. You don't need to be afraid of measuring. Here you go, Scott. A little rabbit trail. You think Jesus was looking for a specific number of apostles, disciples, or a collection of people that he just felt could accomplish his goals? So
Hmm.
if he set out like, I'm looking for 12, at some point, was he like, all right, so 1, 2, 3, all right, I got 8. I need 4 more.
Need four more. Yeah.
Yeah. Or was he looking for the just a group of people that were developing at the right pace and that he felt like he had the right people in the right place at the right time? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, we know how many people these mass feeding things that happened.
Yeah.
We got the feeding of the 5,000. We know about how many souls were added in Acts chapter 2.
Hmm.
I mean, I suppose we could say they were just guesstimating or someone counted. Just guess. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So they ended up saying about because they got tired of counting at some
They
point.
got tired of counting.
It's 2,400 and all right, it's about 3,000.
About 3,000. Yeah. But I mean, that's something. That's still counting, right?
It was
Hey,
the
if
usher
you've
with the
ever stood
clicker
in the
at the
back of
door.
the yeah, if you've ever stood in the back of the sanctuary and you've tried to count, you know how hard it is. You're like, I don't know, there's about
Yeah,
50
like, all
people
right,
here.
forget how many. All right, yeah, there's 15 rows of pews. Looks like about 8. Okay, in each.
Yeah, it's about that.
All
All right,
right,
let's
implementing our
land
vision
this.
indicators. What do we got to do to
Yes,
implement vision indicators, Scott?
implementing. Okay, well, so there's kind of three things I would say. The first thing is you need to, after you've reviewed, this is kind of assuming that you're reviewing them. So I would say maybe let me take one step back. A common question I get in churches is who are the vision indicators for and who are they visible to?
Mm-hmm.
I would make the contention that when you are sitting on that airplane, you don't you aren't given access to the dashboard because you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not necessary for you. And in fact, if you were to see every button and every dial and every instrument, it might overwhelm you. And by the way, a modern avionics talk to you. They say things to you. And if you've ever sat near the front of an airplane before a flight, have you ever heard them kind of testing all the systems, AJ, while
At
they've
least
got the
in
door?
an Airbus, or the Boeing people probably like, I don't know, this shit's talking to me.
Have you ever heard them going through all their checks and
I've
testing
never heard
different
that,
systems?
no, but I mean, yeah, I've certainly heard in-flight things. Yeah.
I was sitting on a very small, it was a like an Embraer 145. So these are really small planes for those of you who don't know, where it's a single aisle, really narrow body plane where it's going to be one seat. There's
Big
no
corporate
first
jet.
class
Yeah.
on these things. There's it's a row with one seat and then a row with two seats. So there's three seats kind of total on each row. At any rate, I was sitting towards the front and I was hearing these guys go through their checks, and the thing starts yelling out, terrain, 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 terrain. We're on the ground.
Minimums.
Yeah.
Minimums.
Minimums, terrain, pull up. And I'm thinking, we're on the ground. So, I mean, I'm not too worried. But if you're hearing that,
Yeah.
people get nervous. People get nervous on airplanes when they start to hear things they don't know and all this. My point is, your vision indicators aren't for everyone. They're for your leadership. They're for your staff. If you have a board, they're for your board. People can get confused by these things. They can start to freak out and say, are we all about the numbers here? Is this all we care about here at this church? It's the numbers. And you know that that's not true. And you know that that's not the case. And you know the role that the vision indicators play. Not everyone knows that. So the first thing I would say is not everyone needs to be aware of what they are, but your leadership team does. And you should be tracking them on a regular basis. So the first kind of part of it, implementing, is you should be tracking them. I would say monthly. Monthly is probably frequently enough to know, are we making progress? The second thing I'd say is then to update your actions based on what you see. So if it's been 3 months and there's no progress, things don't seem to be improving, we should ask the question, do we have a plan for things to get, to be improving? So take the church that I was just with this last weekend, that is going to be adding more groups over the course of the next year. Well, in 1 month, they're not going to add a new group.
Mm-hmm.
But if we get 6 months in and there are no new groups, it would be reasonable for them to go, exactly when are we going to be launching some new groups?
Yeah.
What is the plan for that? And who is going to be doing that? So you need to be updating your action plans based on the results you start to see. And then finally, I would say celebrate and motivate. I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago on the podcast, AJ, but I was chatting with one of our pastors we've been working with just a few weeks ago. And he was, and I know regular listeners, you're like, we heard this story from you like 2 weeks ago. I know, but it just really jumped out to me how when the pastor called me, he was sounding a little bit depressed because there were things that were on his action plan that just haven't happened. And it's been like 18 months, 2 years. And it's not a lot of things. There are a couple of very small detail things that have not happened. And I'm like, dude, but here are all the things that have happened. And here's the goal that you set, and you surpassed that goal. And here's this goal that you set, and you surpassed that goal. I'm like, what in the world are you worried about? Things are going great.
Yeah.
And he got so caught up in the minutia of, a handful of details that he kind of missed the big picture that they really needed. The biggest problem they have is that they need to set new goals, because they had met all of the old ones. So don't forget that in your tracking, celebrate the progress, because you won't feel it. You won't feel like you've made progress, except only in comparison to where you started.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, let's land the plane here, Scott. Vision indicators. If you are not measuring progress towards your vision, you need to start doing that. If you don't have a plan towards accomplishing your vision, you need to implement that. If you don't have a vision at all, you need to implement that. So a lot of to-dos now from the old Church Revitalization podcast today. And we're happy to help you with any of those pieces. So you're always welcome to reach out, leadership@malphursgroup.com, or go to malphursgroup.com and connect with us other ways there. So yeah, any just good parting words, Scott, for vision indicators besides that?
I don't think so. I've spoken plenty, but I want to thank you. We've heard from several of you. We know that there's lots of you who listen. We don't always hear from you, but I've heard from several of you in the last couple of weeks, that independently, not connected to each other, have said, "Hey, I appreciate the fact that these podcasts are really practical," which is kind of the promise in the intro, that these will be actionable insights, and we do our best. They're not all going to be A plus. This is episode 230.
230.
So yeah, in the long list of episodes, some of them I'm sure are more practical than others, but I don't know. I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for letting us know. That encourages us that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and we hope that we continue to create resources for you that help you in your leadership journey. Whether we ever partner with you one-on-one or not, we hope that we're resourcing you and helping you to become a more effective leader.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for listening. We've got all right. So two last things. If you're interested in exploring becoming a Malphurs Group certified guide, we are still accepting applications leading up to our April 8th in-person training. You can go to malphursgroup.com/certification to get the information on that and to begin that application process. And so, yeah, if you feel like, consulting, you maybe have the skill sets for that, feel like God may be leading you to do that, and you like the terminology that we use, the process that we talk about, then yeah, we'd love to talk with you about that. The other thing is, at malphursgroup.com/donate is an opportunity for you to sow back into our ministry. We have some unfunded trips still happening. We still need some people to help support an upcoming trip to Spain in just a week from now, in which we're going to be doing some group pastor training there, and then trips coming up to Munich to strengthen a single congregation there, and then a congregation in Thailand as well, coming up in a few months. So go to malphursgroup.com/donate. We need your support to make those trips happen and to be able to carry on the work of our ministry. This has been episode 230 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. So you can get today's show notes, video, audio at malphursgroup.com/230. And we're glad that you were with us. We will see you next time.